1. Several years ago, I was a lonely and desperate college student, with an overwhelming desire to experience some sort of female contact. Despite a plethora of lovely ladies all over my campus, I was having difficulty in approaching them as a result of a fairly recent and completely devastating breakup. The ex-girlfriend not only had the honor of breaking my heart, but also my self-confidence and worth. The breakup itself took a staggering 6 months of her coming and going out of my life, seemingly interested in getting back together, before ending it all over again. A few years later, I am attempting to mend the pieces of my heart and start fresh. Though I was still rather terrified of having the same thing happen all over again, my hormones simply would not cooperate. I tried to ignore the glaring biological need until my poor hand couldn't take it anymore. That's when I got the brilliant idea that if I could not talk to a woman, then perhaps I could pay for one. I am far from a streetwise fellow, and have seen too many episodes of Miami Vice to know that it wasn't a good idea to go scouring the various corners downtown. After all, we live in the golden age of the internet, and this will surely be a safe source to fulfill such desires. The timeline in which this occurred was shortly after that Craigslist killer prompted them to shut down their adult services. However, I soon discovered a similar site called Backpage, and took my depravity there. It should be noted that this was indeed a decision that I now completely regret, and I really should have known better. But the male sex drive is a very powerful thing, and though I initially resisted, I soon found myself obsessing over it. I think at this point I was less excited about the sex and just needed to get it over with so that I could resume my life. The big day finally happened, and for better or worse, I was ready. After scrolling through the site as though I were picking an ice cream flavor, and attempting to spot signs of police stings, as though I really knew what I was looking for, I found the lucky lady and gave her a call. The service was advertised as a massage, and was about $140 for an hour. She seemed fairly nice on the phone, and the exchange of details was actually smooth. She gave me an approximate location and said to call her when I'm in the area to get the full address. The motel was in an awful neighborhood, and seedy to the point that describing it would almost sound too cliché. Thankfully, I did go in the middle of the afternoon, and thus had plenty of daylight to protect my debauchery. Or so I thought. She answered the door dressed only in negligee and a thong. She was a little thick, a positive trait for me, and overall an attractive figure. Moreover, she perfectly matched with the photos, thus eliminating one aspect of this endeavor that caused some worry. Now, all I had to do was consider whether she'd suddenly flash a badge in my face, because, to be honest, I never really felt in danger and merely assumed the only two negative outcomes would be a scam or arrest. I'm certain the intimate details are irrelevant, but suffice to say that the exchange of money for pleasure was completed, albeit perhaps with a bit of rushing and boredom on her part. We dressed, and she gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek, before I left the room with an awkward, "See ya." Although I did pay for sex, I still had a sort of uplifting in spirits, and the fact that I just got laid made me feel like some sort of smooth operator. I didn't plan on making it a repeat occurrence, but as I walked to my car, I thought that this might be all I needed to get back on track. All that changed when I bumped into him. He approached me just as I was passing the rear of my car. Admittedly, I don't remember much about how exactly this meeting happened, as I was really confused much into our conversation. Once I figured out exactly what was happening, I noticed him babbling on about his girlfriend and asking what I was doing with her. Still baffled and having a bit of a blunt personality anyway, I replied that I had sex with her. Seeing his rage build, I added, I paid for it. He asked me if I was suggesting she were a whore. to which I almost said something like, "Don't you?" Apparently, my pause to think of a more logical answer infuriated him even further. It was around this time that I noticed he was wearing a hoodie, despite the 90-degree summer heat, and his right hand was suspiciously tucked into his pocket, positioned as if it were gripping something. Being a total idiot, I then realized that I was probably in some sort of danger. I'm a pretty tall and bulky guy, and he was short and tiny. I don't consider myself a badass by any means, but I was certain I could take him in a scrap. However, throw a weapon into the mix, and my stature becomes that of a kitten. While not ever actually seeing a gun or knife, I knew there was one in there, and he made sure to exaggerate his gestures to show me this was the fact. Understanding the severity of the situation, I tell him that I don't want any trouble. He then mentions that he wanted to know what I was going to do to make amends for making such horrible accusations about his totally not a prostitute girlfriend. I then catch on to his drift, and likely the whole point of the confrontation. He wants money, and this was becoming a robbery. Fearing that my car or perhaps life were in consideration to compensate this asshole, I remembered that I had an extra $40 on me to cover any incidental costs like tipping. Playing it as cool as possible, I calmly told him that I could pay him. This revelation seemed to subdue his rage, and he offered a comforting, "Aight." Luckily, the cash was folded in my pocket, thus eliminating the need to show off my wallet full of credit cards. Just as I was sliding my hand down for the money, he mentioned something incredibly bone-chilling. He said, "Better be enough too. Your ass is driving me to an ATM." That statement bolstered a robbery into possible kidnapping, and then maybe murder. I have yet to again experience the equivocal amount of panic and fear that tore through my entire body. I pulled the cash out, said a prayer, and thought of my mom. He took a very brief look at his prize before shoving it into his own pocket. Because the two bills were folded over a few times, I now think that he merely saw the number 20 and quickly judged from the girth of the folds to assume that it was more than he got. I can't imagine someone going through this much trouble and being satisfied with just $40. Nonetheless, he said, "Now get the fuck out of here." And I did, not even allowing myself to take a breath. The actual act of unlocking, entering the car, and driving out of the parking lot is completely gone from my memory. I finally become self-aware again once I noticed that I was parked at a gas station across the street from the motel. This is the point where my composure rapidly turned into a near loss of sanity. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried and screamed. Some obscenities, but mostly just high-pitched wailing. Now coherent, but far from rational, I peeled out of the gas station and sped onto the nearby highway, traveling around roughly 80 to 90 miles per hour on the ramp. After racing the speed of light for a good mile or two, and luckily not causing a massive pileup, I began to calm enough to get the brilliant idea to call someone. With my hand shaking so hard that it proved difficult to hold my phone, I called my brother. He was sympathetic, and even expected such a call, as I had previously told him of my quest for flesh and ignored his warning of possible danger. Unfortunately, he had me on speakerphone, and his wife heard the entire story. She suggested I call the police, which honestly was a notion that never occurred to me. Although now I was regaining some semblance of my brain back, and I suddenly remembered that my reason for being at the motel was illegal. Not being a fan of law and order, I had no idea what the police might do with a criminal reporting a crime. Would they care? Is robbery worse than solicitation? Therefore, I declined her plan but wanted a less incriminating course of action. She then offered me the perfect ultimatum. Either I call the police and report it, or she was going to tell my mom. I called the police and was told to meet an officer at a nearby Burger King. Before I arrived, I also called a friend and asked him if he could join me there for moral support. Standing in the parking lot, I explained to the officer that I went to the motel for an honest-to-good massage and that I didn't know it was meant to advertise prostitution. I went on to explain that although I know the notion of both of us being naked was suspicious, it wasn't until she touched my genitals that I jumped up and left. I am certain that I sounded like a moron, and that cop probably didn't believe a word of it. He said that officers were en route to check it out. And, with a smile, offered the advice that next time I should just go to a massage parlor. I went back with said friend to his house, and made sure to tell my folks and family that I was robbed, but twisted the truth quite a bit, and said it was while getting gas. The lady with whom I just shared bodily fluids sent me a multitude of hateful and graphic text messages later on that evening. She claimed that the police and motel forced her to leave, and she questioned as to why I accused her of robbing me. Although I never explicitly reported her direct involvement, it was likely the logical conclusion for the officers. It was incredibly tempting to engage her in such banter and demand to know answers, but I merely let it go and ignored her. A detective did eventually call me, and he was a cool guy, and seemed to hint at the fact that he knew that my innocent and naive disposition was fabricated. But he was in robbery and not vice, so he didn't seem to care about my reasoning for being at the motel. He admitted that there wasn't a lot that could be done, as there were no witnesses nor security footage, and the lady was claiming ignorance. But he said it was a good idea that I ignored her contact, and reassured me that these folks know nothing about me, but reinforced the dangers of such business deals. I was rather bummed that this dude could just intimidate and rob me without any repercussions. Although it could be argued that I asked for such an encounter, and that is probably true. After all, if you play with matches, you might get burned. It was an unnecessary risk and an incredibly stupid moment of desperation. The most baffling part of this tale is trying to figure out how it happened. Going on the assumption that these two were in some sort of partnership or arrangement, why did the robbery occur after the deal was sealed? She was compensated in agreement for her own terms. Wouldn't it make more sense to simply raise her rates? Or if robbery were their only incentive, why go through the act of having sex with a stranger? Why not have the guy waiting in the bathroom, wait until your willy is hanging loose, and then storm out to demand the money? Perhaps she wasn't involved, and really had no knowledge of what this fellow was doing. Although it is easy to assume he was just her pimp, it is possible that he knew of her business and thought he'd take a piece of the action from the pervs leaving the room. Then again, there is the possibility that he really was her boyfriend and had no idea of her entrepreneurship, although I think that's the most unlikely scenario. In the years that have passed since this incident occurred, I am less stricken with anger than I am with simple curiosity. Having no real interest in meeting either of these clowns again, a part of me kind of does, if not to just ask such burning questions. Perhaps I could offer them some business advice because they obviously know nothing about how crime or prostitution works. So to my paid lover and her pimp boyfriend, let's not meet. And to my fellow horny male brethren, if you can't get laid the old-fashioned way, just ask your hand for a dance. It's far less complicated, and the only danger is getting carpal tunnel. 2. I feel I should start out with the fact that I own a cemetery. It's my family cemetery. It was started back in the mid-1800s. They immigrated to this area in rural Indiana in the 1830s. They had a lot of land, and one day a homeless door-to-door salesman died while visiting their home. So they buried him in the yard. There are now 300 burials in this cemetery, including my own child in 2007 and my grandfather in 2011. So like my family cemetery is really rural and super nice. But in the fall and winter, when there are leaves and snow that can crunch under your boots, it can be kind of creepy, right? Like a few times I've been walking out there in the past, and I swear there is someone shuffling right behind me. I've run out of that cemetery so many damn times, especially when it's dusk and the sun is going down. So a few years ago, it had snowed a good 6 inches, but I have to go out and make sure the trees were sound, because the snow can knock off limbs and damage stones. I go up the hill, no problem. As I'm going down the hill, I start hearing this loud crunching behind me. I didn't even look, guys. I take off running down the hill and get into the car sobbing. Hubby is all, "What the fuck, why are you crying?" So I tell him and he starts making fun of me. He finally goes, "I'll go up there and come back and show you it's okay." He's gone about 10 minutes and I see him hauling ass to the car. I mean, he's running. He jumps in the car and starts it, and won't answer me and just drives off. When we get home, he tells me that it was just my footprints going up the hill. But about halfway down the hill, there are size 13 work boot prints that joined my prints, just behind mine. 3. I'm sitting at home last night, and I just finished my 4th can of beer, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I can't be arsed cooking. So I'm going to go down the road, get some Red Rooster and some cider. I go down there and do all that, and that's fine. On the walk back, I see this person about 100 meters up the road from me. They stop and stare, so I do the same for a moment. And me being the drunken, stubborn asshole I am, I just pull my hood off and earphones out. I'm not the most friendly looking of people, so this person waits for me, and when I pass, she decides to try and follow me by keeping pace. She's skinny, got shoulder-length brown hair, and a thick Scottish or Irish accent, and is super energetic. "Wow, I can't believe how big that tree is over there," she shouts, as she points over my shoulder within seconds of meeting me. I look her dead in the eye and reply with, "Oh really? Which tree would that be?" Internally, I just got a flashback of Pooh telling Kanga about the fish in the tree, and I was like, "You're fucking kidding me, right?" inside my head. "That one over there!" she shrieks at me, while trying to get me to stop and look, so I keep staring at her until her gaze shifts off of me, and I see the tree she's referring to, and yes, it is quite large. I don't stop walking. I forgot to mention that as soon as she started following me, she tried to get on my right side. I kept her on my left for 2 reasons. One, the road was on the right, and the other will become apparent soon. When I don't stop walking, she switches tactics and tries to start flirting with me. Asexual, no dice. So when that doesn't work, her next tactic is to try and engage me in small talk. She tells me that her name is Alice and asks me what my purpose is. I just give her a look and reply, "My purpose is to go home." And she gets excited and replies with, "Wow, that's insane, that's what I'm doing too." Sure you are, Alice. Sure you are. At this point, about a minute and a half have gone by, and I'm pretty calm but walking at an accelerated pace, to the point where she's jogging to keep up with me, and it's starting to tire her out. She perceived this as nervousness until she realized I was calm, and refused to break eye contact with her. So she suddenly blurts out, "Wow, you're a really fast walker." I cracked a smile internally because I knew that this was my chance to get her to leave me alone, and it fucking worked. I replied with, "Yep, I walked 10 kilometers this afternoon. Gotta keep the legs strong and myself fit for Taekwondo," which was true. At this, her eyes bugged out of her head, and as soon as we passed an opening to another street, she booked it. My 2.5-minute encounter was over, and no one got hurt. It took me a couple of minutes to register what just happened, so I called the police, and as soon as I told them what happened, they asked a series of identifying questions, and then came back to me with, Oh yeah, I think I know whom you're talking about. We'll send a car out immediately. Did she have any weapons with her? Thankfully she didn't. Oh, and the other reason I had her on my left side is my preferred reason for doing knife hand strikes. A good blow to the neck and or nose is usually enough to stop someone from bothering you. But that is only, and I repeat, only, a last resort. I don't know. I think I could have handled it better. If I wasn't complacent, and I would have had my 9 LED flashlight on me, and shined it in her face the entire time she started creeping me out, and been like, see how bright this is? Isn't that insane? I'm joking, of course, but if you're walking around at night, that's a handy tool to have. Blind people don't have great aim. So what are your thoughts? Was she trying to rob me, or am I being paranoid? How would you have handled the situation? 4. Okay, so first off, if this sounds a bit weird, I'm not used to writing these kind of stories. I'm more of a reader. Anyway, I'm Kat, a 20-year-old girl currently in college, but this happened my junior year of high school. I was dating this guy I was hopelessly in love with at the time. He was the first actual guy I liked and dated. Not my first boyfriend, though. But that's a story for another time. Anyway, in my junior year of high school, I dated a guy named Jay. Sweet guy, but a bit of a dork who I should note is now my ex. The only real problem we had the whole time we were dating was that we were an interracial couple. The high school I attended was mostly African American and Hispanic, with a lot of students who were immigrants and refugees. Once Jay and I started dating, we both quickly noticed people acted different around us. Not everyone, just a few people, mostly black females. Just so you know, Jay was black and I am white, like super white. Like whiter than milk, ghost pale kind of white, although not like blonde hair and blue eyes white, more medium brown hair and hazel eyes, which Jay told me was one of the reasons he fell for me. Angel eyes, he used to call me. Anyway, so when Jay and I hung out in the halls between classes, we drew attention, mostly positive attention from everyone, except certain girls like Becky. A short, slightly stocky black girl with, no offense to her, frankly terrible acne and a weird body odor. She had apparently made it pretty clear to everyone, especially Jay, that she liked him, but he always turned her down. She always whined when he did, and said they needed each other so they could one day continue the black race. Yeah. You see why he said no. That and the odor, mainly. Anyway, right from the bat when Jay and I started dating, who was the number one person who stared at us? Becky. She mostly stared at me. Jay and I used to hang in a special corner that a lot of the cool kids, aka skaters and weirdos, hung out in near the library. 'Cause we were pretty weird too. Anyhow, Becky starts hanging out in the corner when we did. Just one day she plopped herself down, bag of chips in hand, slowly eating away while staring at us. I always ignored her. But Jay got worried. He always made it a point to meet me and drop me off to each one of my classes. Sweet at first, but it got a little weird, especially when Becky started following us. Always staring at us. Once in a while she would accidentally bump into us, mostly me. I would turn and glare at her, then continue on making sure she saw me, kiss Jay on the lips. If the little bitch wanted to mess with me, I wanted to make it clear it didn't bother me, and I also wanted to rub it in her face that Jay was mine. And mine alone, so she better stop it and keep her stupid stubby hands away from my Pooh Bear, which is what I called him, mainly because he was good at impressions like Winnie the Pooh, plus he was super sweet like honey too. But the little bitch kept at it. Then the notes came. I knew they were from Becky. I recognized her handwriting, which was impeccable. That was one of the nicer things about her. The notes at first weren't bad. They mostly consisted of calling me a bitch, hoe, slut, which wasn't entirely true. Yeah, I could be a bit of a bitch sometimes, but only when you messed with something I cared about, like family and friends. But the slut and whore part were slightly offensive. When I was still in high school, I was still a proud virgin, not really because of religious reasons or I was a prude. It was mostly because I was nervous and awkward when it came to sex, and also a bit paranoid about getting pregnant. My school had quite a few teen moms, and I did not want to be 16 and pregnant. I wasn't on birth control like I am now, and using just a condom was still risky. Me not wanting to have sex was the main reason Jay and I broke up. He was a horny teenage guy. I felt so bad I let him go to someone I knew could give him what he wanted. Although we are still friends, FYI. Although when we were still dating, and I got these notes, things were still good. I showed them to Jay, and he held on to me so he could comfort me. He knew they did upset me a bit, especially when they got more intense. The notes soon became threatening. The person who sent them, who I definitely knew to be Becky, started saying that I should go die. I should take my fat ass, perky-tittied white ass, and go slit my wrists. One of the notes even said that the person, aka Becky, was going to make sure that she got some of her big, muscled friends to rape my harlot, seductress, whore white ass right in my asshole until I die from blood loss down in the woods by our school, on either the old mattress or couch there was out there. Side note, who the fuck uses the word harlot in a sentence? Becky had gone too far. That was the breaking point for me. More than the time I found a dead rat in my brand new locker the school had just put in, although with a note by my lunch that said "Bon appetit, slut. Go eat with the vermin like I know you are." Smiley face, then heart. That was fucking it. I was done. Jay and I talked about it and gathered the notes that I was smart enough to keep, plus a picture of the rat in my locker, with the note to confirm it was real. Then reported it to the administration. Luckily for me, they believed me and even went back to check video surveillance. A little info about the way my school is: it is highly secured, both with cameras everywhere. And I mean everywhere, plus big scary-looking security officers. That accurately were big teddy bears once you got to know them. One of them, Mr. W, was personally one of my heroes. He took my complaint on without hesitation. I had been close to him since my freshman orientation at my school. He was a tall, bald black man, with a normally stern expression on his face, but a smile that could put you at ease. He believed me right away, and so did all the administrators. I was a good student. A slightly odd but model student. In fact, I was usually called the teacher's pet. So there was no reason not to believe me. The administrators plus security finally gathered the notes, found the video proof they needed, then called a meeting in the principal's office at that. I was sitting next to Mr. W, who was there to help me through this meeting. Then I remembered the door of the office opened and yep, in walked Becky. Not scary or upset to see what was in the principal's office. Nope, she had a cocky look on her face and a small smirk on her lips. She sat down with more of the security standing behind her, in case they needed to restrain her for any reasons. Mr. W then proceeded to explain why she was here. A little before Becky proceeded to explain that I was being racist and violent towards her, and she wanted to place a counter-complaint. My jaw literally dropped to the floor. This little bitch. But Mr. W luckily had none of it, and talked about the evidence, including the video, which clearly showed her breaking into my locker by having one of the janitors do it after lying to him about it being her locker. He was a newly hired janitor, who was later fired for endangerment because they explained to him he could have put me in serious danger had she placed a bomb or other weapon in the locker. As Mr. W was talking to Becky, she stared at me with pure hate on her face, plus her arms were crossed. She then interrupted Mr. W by stating, "Are you really taking the side of this retard-ass cracker?
after what they did to us."
As soon as that came out of her mouth, Mr. W's jaw dropped. Then his face turned to pure rage, and he slammed his hand on the table, then proceeded to yell at her. Becky flinched, then her smirk and cocky expression fell. He proceeded to yell at her for 5 minutes without stopping, and by the end she was in tears. Becky tried to apologize. She tried to defend herself by stating she was just trying to do what was right, that white whores like me are the reason black men leave or don't date black women anymore, that we are ruining the black community by making unnatural children and leaving behind good women who give you good children. Yep, that was her reasoning. She was even trying to say she was just joking about the killing and rape part. Luckily for me, Mr. W and the rest of the administration believed me, and Becky was properly punished for what she did. Becky was expelled from my school. I later learned this wasn't the first time she did this. She's had a history of being racist, and had even been suspended for saying that the school mascot we had, which was a black panther, a lady panther at that actually, was a sign that blacks were better than whites, and that black people needed to come together and take back their humanity. All the while screaming this at a teacher who was white in a class of mostly black kids. She was apparently known to curse and spit at the few white kids that attended my school. After she was expelled, I never saw or heard from her again, minus a friend request on Facebook, which I promptly deleted, then I blocked her. I think she tried to contact me because she saw I wasn't at J anymore. A part of me wants to hope she changed and saw the error of her ways, but I'm not taking any risks. I've recently made peace in my life by throwing anything negative out and surrounding myself with positive people. And I don't want any of that, especially since I have a cousin that recently had a mixed baby that I sometimes watch, so I don't want a woman that has shown a distaste for mixed-race people around. So Becky, for your sake, I really hope I never see or hear from you again, mostly for your safety. So Becky, you better hope we never meet. 5. I look much younger from behind. Trust me, this is important to the story. I'm a 33-year-old female, and the event I'm about to describe took place earlier this year, in April 2017. Now, I'm not saying that from the front I look like the Crypt Keeper or anything, but I look age-appropriate. I look like a woman in her early 30s. From behind, however, I look much, much younger, possibly in my late teens. I know this because I've been asked to leave stores that have a 2 high school students maximum limit declared on their doors. Of course, when I turn around to face my accuser, there's a lot of stammering and quite a few apologies, and we're all good at that point. I think the mistaken identity has to do with how I dress. On casual days, I'm usually wearing jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie of some sort. My hair is tied back into a ponytail, and instead of a purse, I generally carry a tote bag. I tend to stand idly, seemingly without purpose, staring at shelves for long periods of time. I'm not usually in any hurry. This apparent fuck-all attitude must only further convince people that I'm a high school student. From behind, of course. Once I turn around to show these people that I am, in fact, not a teenager, I am typically met with the same look. It's difficult to describe the look, but it's one of intense confusion, combined with a bit of surprise, and what's either embarrassment or frustration. The look will only last a few seconds, but it's one I've gotten to know quite well over the past 5 or so years. My response in these situations is to just smile, wait for them to either apologize or explain themselves, or both, and then I either share a laugh with them, or turn to go back to my business as they return to theirs. No harm done. So with that explained, let me start the story. Every spring in east central Wisconsin, the sturgeon run, and it's a big deal. They go from Lake Winnebago up the Wolf River to their spawning grounds in Shawano. This event can take place over the span of a few days to about a week. It depends on a lot of different factors that you probably don't care about, and aren't important to this story. A sturgeon guard, made up of volunteers, is gathered during this time to make sure no one bothers the sturgeon on their way up the river. Crowds gather along the shores of the Wolf River to watch these fish congregate in the shallows. I should at least explain here that these are massive fish. Wikipedia tells me that these sturgeon, lake sturgeon, for those of you who care, can top out at 7.25 feet long and weigh over 240 pounds. So yeah, big fish. They're also considered a threatened species, and so, when they're not running up the Wolf River to spawn, it's pretty rare to see one. This is why a lot of people gather to watch them on their run up to Shawano, myself included. I decided to go early one morning. Before work and before the crowds gathered en masse at my viewing location. I hate crowds of people. I never feel comfortable when I'm surrounded by people. So I made sure to set out extra early for my destination, even before the sun was up. I had my camera with me, a Canon 7D Mark II, and it had a 100 to 400mm lens on it. It was a pretty heavy piece of equipment. It's also a pretty expensive piece of equipment, really. It's the nicest thing I own. These details are also important to the story. When I arrived at my location, the sun had just started coming up. I pulled into the small gravel parking area and I looked around. Good. I couldn't see any other people except for the men in the sturgeon guard who were in a boat, headed around a bend in the river and out of my sight. Perfect. The day was kind of cloudy, not great for pictures. But still, I hoped to get a few decent shots. Anyway, and the fewer people were around, the better my chances were. I got out of my car, put the strap of the camera around my shoulder, placed my keys in my hoodie pocket, and locked my car door. I started across the gravel parking lot, my tennis shoes making that distinct crunching sound with every step. There were multiple gravel paths leading down to the asphalt walkway next to the river, and I chose the one farthest to the left. Even if someone did show up while I was taking photos, they were more likely to take the shorter path straight ahead or to the right, rather than the one I had taken. This is a smallish open area that gently slopes down slightly, so from the parking lot, you can see the beginning and end of all the gravel paths that lead to the walkway and the river. You're never out of sight of the parking lot, unless you decide to take a hike into the small town on the left, or up and around on the country road to the right. I hope this makes sense. Basically, there's nowhere for anyone to hide. Everyone can see everyone else, and there's a highway running along one side of the park to boot. It should be a relatively safe area for a lone gal to be early in the morning. I crunched my way down the gravel path to the walkway that borders the river. My attention was immediately grabbed by the throngs of sturgeon splashing in the shallows. For those of you that know anything about camera equipment, yes, you're right. I didn't need the zoom lens if I was so close. But I wanted the close-up pictures of the sturgeon, not the wide angles of their activity, if that makes sense. At any rate, I must have been down there for a good 20 minutes or so, happily clicking away in my camera. My back to the parking area, all of my attention focused on the sturgeon in the river. Finally, there seemed to be a lull in the sturgeon's activity, and so I capped my lens and changed the setting on the camera so that I could preview the shots I had taken. I had just started browsing through my shots. The way they appeared was, as I clicked through them, the image would flash on the screen, and then, when I pressed the forward button, there would be a quick moment of a blank screen before the next image appeared. Click, blank, photo, click, blank, photo. I was only about 20 or so images into my review. I was holding the camera at a weird angle, so to keep what sunlight there was from obscuring the images on the screen, when I noticed on one of the blank screens what appeared to be someone approaching me from behind. Click, blank. Yep, It was definitely someone coming down the path. Photo. But I couldn't hear any crunching on the gravel. That seemed odd. Click, blank. It was a man dressed appropriately casual for this event. In this type of weather at this time of year. Jeans, a windbreaker, some kind of hiking boots or shoes. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the ground, not ahead, but at his feet. Photo. I mentally groaned. I'm not social by any means, and I don't want to have to make small talk with a stranger. That's why I had arrived so early. I didn't want to people today. Click, blank. Now his gaze was up, looking directly at my back. He had a weird, lopsided grin on his face. His hands were still in his pockets. Photo. I still couldn't hear him approaching, and he was close enough to me that I should have been able to hear him. Click, blank. He was looking at his feet again, still walking toward me. He had an odd kind of gait, it seemed. And that's when it hit me. Photo. Is this guy trying to sneak up on me? Click, blank. I looked at his feet in the reflection of my screen, and I saw that they were just in the grass bordering the gravel. Photo. That kept his approach silent, but he wasn't far enough over that I'd be able to spot him in my peripheral vision. Click, blank. He was looking up again directly at me, at my back. He was definitely headed toward me. His body language told me he was preparing some kind of interaction. Photo. Nothing about his body language said that he had any intention of going around me. Click, blank. He was so close now. Close enough that if he had wanted to make small talk, he should have announced his presence. He should have mumbled some kind of greeting by way of introduction. But he was still silent. Photo. In situations like these, I have a fun tendency to berate myself. Do something, dummy, I told myself. Before he grabs you, do something, you idiot. Click, blank. He was so very, very close now. I couldn't run with my heavy equipment, and to be honest, I probably couldn't have outrun him without my equipment anyway. Also, I'm fairly certain the camera and lens are worth more than I am, so I didn't want to damage either piece of equipment either. Photo. Without thinking too much about it, I turned about 90 degrees so that the river was on my left, and this man was on my right. These fish sure are something to see, aren't they? I asked him in what I hoped was a strong, confident voice. The man stopped in his tracks, but he wasn't saying anything. Hesitantly, I looked over at him, turning slightly to face him, and that's when I saw it. The look. The look that I was so used to was playing across his face. I smiled gently, which, as I mentioned, was my usual reaction in this type of situation. But then it hit me hard enough to almost take my breath away. He thought I was younger. He wasn't expecting a woman. He was expecting a teenager. He thought he was sneaking up on someone younger. Holy shit! He thought he was sneaking up on a teenage girl. I tried not to let the fear and disgust I suddenly felt show in my face. But he knew that I knew. I could see the anger just below the surface. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt," he said tersely. "I thought you were someone else." Yeah, you did, I thought to myself. Before I could think of how to respond, he had looked around the empty park, and a slow smile crept back onto his face. "Are you here all by your lonesome?" he asked. I cannot properly express how this phrase terrified me. I doubt I can even convey how creepily sinister this man sounded as he said it. He knew that I knew his intentions, at least the nature of them, if not the details. But he was apparently committed to those intentions anyway, despite having been found out. He took another step closer to me. I took a step back. That's when I heard a car pull into the gravel lot. The car drove to the side of the lot closest to where the man and I were standing. We watched the car come to a stop, shut off, and an older, probably retired couple with really nice camera equipment stepped out. The woman was closest to me. We briefly made eye contact, and without thinking I stuck up my hand and waved, "Hey!" I called out, in a familiar, glad to see you tone of voice. I had hoped to convince the man beside me that I knew these people, even if I did only briefly fool him. I hoped it would be enough time to get away and back toward my car. What happened next? I never would have expected. The retired couple looked down at me from their vantage point next to their car in the lot. They turned, looked at each other, and the woman waved back at me. "Hi, sweetie," she shouted. "Sorry we're late, but you know how your dad is about directions." This woman patted her partner's shoulder and gave an apologetic shrug before he opened his trunk and began digging through it. The creeper next to me stammered out an "Excuse me." Then he took off down the path toward the country road and the big bend. There were tears in my eyes by the time I reached the couple in the lot. "Thank you so much," I started, but the woman just waved me off. "Been there," she said, and that was that. They offered to let me tag along with them, but I explained that I had to get to work in a city that was about 2 hours away, so they walked me to my car, waited as I got settled in, and stood there, watching to make sure I turned out of the lot and onto the highway okay. About halfway through my drive to work, I suddenly blurted out into the emptiness of my car, "What the fuck?" Then the shake started, so I pulled off of the highway into a gas station to wait for them to pass. By this point it was full-on morning, and I felt safe enough just idling there while I attempted to collect myself. 10 minutes later, I was back on my way to work, where I tried to forget about the entire situation, or at least put it well behind me. The fallout from this event is that I'm too afraid to go out and take pictures by myself anymore. I used to love nature photography, which would take me to some gorgeous, albeit isolated locations. I've tried to get back into it, but I find myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to settle down and just focus on the photography. As a result, my photos aren't really worth the effort. Maybe one day, though, I'll get back what this creep stole from me. Here's hoping, at any rate. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 56. Big thanks to everybody who sent their stories in for this video. If you have a story yourself, then please do send it over to kingofthecities@gmail.com. And if you do, thank you kindly. Also, if you need to find it, you can find the email in the description of every single video I post. It's fairly near the top. Just click where it says show more, and you'll find it there. And it should also be on the outro card on every video as well, just to make it easy to find. Okay, well, where are we now? Well, I'm recording this on Monday, so I think you guys will probably get it on Tuesday. And I'm going to get these videos wrapped up, and hopefully get done a bit early, because I've been getting back into, I don't know if anyone's ever tried it, I've been getting back into Star Trek Online recently. I played it a few years ago, and I think I created a Trill character called Tarix, that was his name. And I got to the rank of lieutenant, and I lost interest in it, but was in the mood to play it a little bit. So I was doing that. Yes, ordered a pizza yesterday, and which is not something I do too often either. And I was playing that, and I got to Lieutenant Commander this time, so I was kind of renewed my interest a little bit. Although I've got to say that the fight system in it for when you're attacking ships and so on, that's kind of boring, so I'll need to see if there's anything I can do to make that more interesting. Maybe I'm just not doing it right, which is entirely possible. So hopefully that'll be my evening, get done with work early, have a bath, bit of dinner, and then I'll be playing Star Trek Online. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.